Middle Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, slackers, and welcome back to another episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Jason Eck, and I guess you can call this a Easter episode. Although there's absolutely nothing about Easter we're really going to get into, I am recording this the night before Easter, so I always drop on Sunday morning, so this particular episode is going to be dropping on Easter Sunday morning. So whether you are celebrating it as a religious holiday, maybe it's just a way to get together with family and friends, or maybe it's just a regular Sunday, regardless, I want to say thank you for coming back and checking out another episode of the show. So this week is just going to be me, and I went back to the very first episode of the show, and I realized that I said something that maybe isn't necessarily going to translate to everyone who could potentially listen to the show when I call it a Gen X podcast. So for the individuals who are at the early stages, so let's say we take the 1964. So it's either 64 or 65, that's usually the starting point, right? And I talk about 1992, the year that I graduated from high school, as peak Gen X. Well, for someone else who graduated in 1982, that was their moment. That was their time going out into the world. I have an aunt who's exactly, almost to the day, 10 years older than me. She's 1964. We bonded about a lot of this stuff, but her experience would have been very different being born in 1964. So I decided that this episode was going to be about 1982. So much like the 1979 episode, this is very similar in the fact that I'm going to dig into the movies and the music of that time. Now, in 1982, I was 8 years old. So I look at these things even from a different perspective than the 1979 episode, in the fact that I really recall these things happening, even more so than those much earlier formative years that would have been in 1979. And I'm taking a look at some of the songs and some of the movies, and I'm going, holy cow. Some of these were critical to my actual development as a human being, just because pop culture has been so much of what's formed who I am today. So let's take a look at the Billboard year-end Hot 100 singles of 1982. And number one for the year is Physical by Olivia Newton-John. This song was ubiquitous. It was simply everywhere. And Olivia Newton-John was basically reinventing herself at this time. So she was kind of considered one particular type of artist, and now she was breaking out into, well, Physical's a rather risque song. And of course she has Grease, Sandy, Xanadu. That was a weird movie. But nevertheless, Physical was the number one song for 1982. Little side note on that, because we've kind of delved into this band a little bit with the podcast with Justin, but the guitar solo on Physical was actually played by a guy that you might have heard of before, Steve Lukather. Now, I always pronounce his name wrong, because as a guitar player, a luthier is someone who actually, makes guitars. Lukather, I always get it wrong. But nevertheless, he was the guy from Toto. That's his band. And he's actually done work with a ton of people, including Boz Scaggs, Michael Jackson. He played with Ringo Starr, and of course Toto. But anyway, it was just kind of an interesting side note that Steve played guitar, because his band actually ends up being on this year-end list a little bit later on. Number two immediately jumped out because it's associated with a movie from 1982, Eye of the Tiger by Survivor. Of course, from Rocky III, which you may recall brings us Clubber Lang. Clubber Lang, played by Mr. T, who also became an icon of this time period. That song is everywhere. I think it is just a permanent piece of Americana. Like that song, every generation knows it and will know it. There are times that it seems completely cheesy. There's other times I hear it, I go, heck yeah, that is such a great tune. The guitar work is amazing on it. I couldn't even tell you who is in that band, to be honest with you, because all I ever think of is, Eye of the Tiger. Next up, so this whole list, I could actually call it something other than Billboard Year-End Hot 100. This is actually Rollerport 91. So Rollerport 91 was the roller rink in Meriden growing up. All of these songs that are on there, or many of them I should say, were in constant rotation at the rink. Because if you were there, get dropped off by your parents, right? And you're there for a couple of hours. Some of these songs would have been played multiple times if you were there long enough. But the next song, I didn't realize it was, this high on the chart. And that is I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. Now, Joan Jett, of course, is still in the news because she's going to be the opening act for the Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Poison Stadium Tour. So it's really good to see Joan still out there playing. She's really quite an important artist, going all the way back to the Runaways. Because obviously with the Runaways, you had Lita Ford, Joan Jett. They have been icons of women in rock and roll. So kudos to Joan, who's actually going to be on here again a little bit later on. And again, both of these songs are covers, but I actually like her covers. And obviously for I Love Rock and Roll, I think most people know of Joan Jett's version more than anything else. The original, here's the kind of trivia question. What was the name of the band? So the original band are the Arrows. They're the Arrows. They're a British rock band. And the song was written by Alan Merrill and Jake Hooker. Now, another guy who seems to make the list of multiple decades and continues to perform and is not only a member of probably the most iconic rock band of all time, but he's an iconic solo artist as well. And here he is doing a duet with another iconic musician. We have Ebony and Ivory by Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder. Now, there is one of my all-time favorite cover songs of Ebony and Ivory. It's by a band called Murphy's Law, who do a killer rendition of Ebony and Ivory. It's actually a perfect song for a punk band. It's great. I love that version. But Paul McCartney is also on the list for a couple of songs. And one that will come up later, I had completely forgotten about that it even existed. And then as soon as I heard it, I'm like, oh my gosh, what a great song that is. Now, I grew up in Connecticut. I grew up in Meriden, and I mentioned that numerous times. However, I have lived in Massachusetts longer than I ever lived in Connecticut. The next band I'd mentioned in the episode with Justin that we talked about our first concerts. And this is the concert that never was. And that is the Geils Band. One of the most iconic bands out of Boston. Of course, you have Aerosmith. In Boston, some people say bands like the Pixies. I know for me, the Mighty Mighty Bosstones were a big band. But the Geils Band in 1982 was one of the biggest bands on the planet. What's interesting is that I think my favorite song by them wasn't out on this record. Must Have Got Lost is my favorite Geils song. Just purely amazing. In the live version, Peter Wolf does this whole riff. That's, what's the name of that chick with the long hair? Rapunzel. Yeah, Rapunzel. I just love it. He's got such a great stage rap. But here he is with Centerfold. The Geils Band with Centerfold. Number 5 song of 1982. This was always on at the Rollerport. Always. It's also not my favorite Geils song. This one kind of gives me one of those weird feelings that I mentioned before that you can't place why. I don't know. Centerfold is just a really strange song for me. Next up, the Human League, with really their one big hit, at least in the States, Don't You Want Me. I remember this song being on the radio. Forget even at the Roll Report. This song was everywhere. And it's such a good song. Like, it really is. And it captures everything that you can want. Because you have that trade-off of the male-female vocal, each telling the song from their own perspective, with this great groove behind it. It's really quite a good pop song, but it's constructed so well. And both of their voices, they play off each other beautifully. Couldn't tell you the names. So let's see, the Human League. The Human League. Who are the members of the band here? Philip Oakley, Joan Catherall, and Susan Ann Sully. I believe that's the original lineup. But it says here that, they were the opening act for Susie and the Banshees. And in 1978, David Bowie, the Thin White Duke himself, was in the audience and later declared that he had seen the future of pop music. That is quite high praise if David Bowie is saying, you are the future of pop music. It's a hell of a song, though, so can't really blame him. Now, you're definitely of a certain age if you remember this particular artist by their original recording name. Now, this person ended up being known by 3 names at one point before getting it back down to 2. But 7 and 8, back to back, John Cougar. Not John Cougar Mellencamp. Not John Mellencamp. No, this was John Cougar. It was such a strange thing when he changed names. You know, he brought in his real last name and eventually dropped the Cougar. But that was his stage name, John Cougar. You have Jack and Diane and Hurt So Good, back to back. His career is very interesting to me because some people have called him the Bruce Springsteen of the Midwest. And certainly I can see elements of that. They both have a certain raspiness in their voice. They both tell stories of young love and then some social commentary. But John Cougar was an artist all unto himself, and I think that Jack and Diane is probably a perfect song. I mean, it really is. Captures everything. It captures everything that you can want in the story of, 2 small town kids doing the best they can. So John Cougar, Hurt So Good, meh. It's okay. It's catchy, but certainly not my favorite of his catalog. But, here it is, at number 8 for 1982. So, the next artist, I've never really got them. They have a couple of good songs. And this is, it's okay. It's iconic. People know it. My kids know it. Steve Miller Band, Abracadabra. I'm going to reach out and grab you. Wow. I mean, that's deep. It's deep stuff. But never been a big Steve Miller Band fan. So moving on. Chicago. Oh, bore me to tears. Oh, gosh. Chicago, particularly that Peter Cetera era. Oh, just so bad. So bad. I don't like really any era Chicago, to be perfectly honest with you. My mom listens to this. She'll be, come on, I love them. No, Chicago, I can't with that. But Soft Cell, Tainted Love, what a great tune that is. Really, what else did Soft Cell do? I'm not sure that I could tell you. But I do like that structure of the song. And obviously it's a cover